So let's talk masculinity.
When we do talk about masculinity, we're often talking about it in negative terms.
Where are all the masculine men?
This is the thing I hear from all women nowadays. Where are all the masculine men?
Why don't we just embrace masculinity?
Your masculinity isn't toxic.
6 masculine habits.
What does masculinity mean to you?
Masculinity in itself is beautiful.
Focus on becoming a gentleman.
Many years ago, it was obvious that being a man, well, it meant being a man. For generations, that term was used to describe an abundance of qualities that one could associate with the term be a man. So where did the term be a man come from? If we go back in time, we can kind of get a glimpse of what they were on about. According to historic literature, the phrase be a man or act like a man originates from the Bible, where the Apostle Paul issues a series of 5 exhortations, specifically from the Corinthians. It reads, be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong, let all that you do be done in love. And in ancient Greek, the word andrizomai translates into courageous or be manly, which pretty much means don't be a pussy in modern day language. And throughout previous timelines before, whether it be through art, literature, and culture, they all knew what being a man meant. There was an unspoken rule that all men abided by. Masculinity was an unspoken contract of resilience and leadership. Icons like Cary Grant and Winston Churchill embodied this ideal. Sharply dressed, well-spoken, and never caught off guard, even after a whiskey or 2, or 3. It's the type of man that will use a single malt as his cologne.
And poured from decanters that look like large perfume bottles made for men.
It was a time of rigid social structures and a deep emphasis on traditional masculinity and decorum. I would argue that most men were never told how to be men. There was no book on the matter. I never heard of someone's father, including my own, that gave them the man talk. Instead, they were shown. It was the responsibility of men and other men to be the purveyors of masculinity. Masculine influence was and always has been the greatest teacher. And for some men, well, let's just say they're still finding their way. But I digress. And many of us grew up with role models who had the just get shit done attitude. They could break their leg and still insist on walking it off. Concussion? No problem at all. These men worked 60-hour weeks, fixed everything around the house, spent time with their kids, and still managed to mow the lawn with a steely-eyed focus. They would do it day after day, week after week, with no complaints, because complaining to them was for the weak. There was a time in history when metaphorically and physically men wore a uniform that they would wear day in and day out. There was a time when men dressed like men, when holding doors and addressing people as sir and madam was common. They would avoid using slang in polite company, and they would prefer a handwritten letter because they knew the art of conversation, because they didn't have email back then, but you get my point. The gentleman did indeed take pride in his appearance back then, whether he was a businessman, a socialite, or a working class professional, because he knew that dressing well was a mark of respectability. Men of that time held themselves to a standard that others aspired to, treating both men and women with dignity and respect. And it was never about dominance. It was about setting a standard. Chivalry was never a gimmick. It was just the way things were done. And let's not forget about their golden rule. Dress like you're going to meet the president. In a 2021 article from Men's Health magazine, Annabelle Maldonado, a clinical psychologist, said, when you put on a suit, you feel more put together. You're going to act more put together. You're going to speak with more authority. So when you feel those qualities, you embody them, and then you come across that way. And furthermore, a study at Northwestern University by psychologist Adam and Galinsky in 2012 found that participants who wore lab coats, which were perceived as professional and associated with intelligence, performed better on cognitive tasks compared to those who wore regular clothes. So in short, the clothes you wear don't just reflect your identity. They can also shape your mindset and the way you approach various situations. And this phenomenon is known as enclothed cognition. Unfortunately, somewhere along the way, the essence of the gentleman's uniform started to disappear, and everything it represented. In the late 20th century, masculinity took a artistic detour. Youth culture exploded, countercultural movements flipped the script, and economic shifts made rebellion the trend of the decade. And what was the ultimate act of defiance? Dishing the tie, of course. and replacing it with denim jackets, oversized sweatshirts, and just enough questionable fashion choices to make past generations have conniptions. Masculinity was no longer about fitting into a mold. It was about smashing it to pieces. Hip-hop stars adorned themselves in gold chains and wore tracksuits like modern-day kings. Grunge musicians made it very, very clear that showering and ironing were just suggestions, and before you knew it, the definition of a real man was as confusing as the LGBT... No. What? Okay. And in the early 2000s, success had a drastically different look. Masculinity was having a mental breakdown. With the internet boom and billionaires dressing like sleep-deprived college freshmen, success and power was no longer measured by tailored suits and a firm handshake, but instead it was about Wi-Fi speeds and how many friends you had on MySpace. Masculinity became as stable as one man's Tinder experience. What used to be a clear-cut role shaped by tradition and cultural norms turned into a choose-your-own-adventure book. Except the story changes every time an influencer goes viral. 1 minute real men chopped wood and drank raw eggs. The next, they're doing skincare routines and thirst trap dances. At this point, masculinity isn't a fixed identity. It's an algorithmic fever dream, constantly reshaped by trends, Twitter debates, and whatever half-baked TED Talk is making the rounds that week.
Bea, how do we create our own anchors of connection? I'm so glad you asked.
And caught between these extremes, however, are the traditional pillars of masculinity: strength, stoicism, formality, and most importantly, responsibility. These qualities find themselves in an ongoing tug of war, where once a well-tailored suit and a composed demeanor signal authority and confidence, today's masculinity is fragmented and shaped by the latest social media discourse. Some see this evolution as liberating, offering men more freedom to define themselves outside of rigid stereotypes. Others view it as destabilizing, leaving a generation of men searching for clarity in a world where the definition of masculinity shifts with every new hashtag. Today, the modern man isn't just expected to be strong. He must be sensitive, socially aware, and well-groomed, and emotionally intelligent. Gone are the days of simply being a man. Now it's a full-time job with no clear dress code. However, there is one place in the world that seems to be the last protector of masculinity, and that place is Pitti Uomo. When it comes to classic menswear, it remains a stronghold for the modern gentleman. Held biannually in Florence, Italy, this prestigious trade show is the last bastion of true masculine style. It brings together luxury heritage brands, artisans, and designers who champion timeless tailoring. Pitti is more than just fashion. It is a celebration of sartorial elegance and masculinity, where industry leaders and style aficionados uphold the tradition while embracing modern influences, not just for men, but also for women. So one thing is certain: masculinity isn't disappearing, it is diversifying. But as we redefine what it means to be a man, are we losing something important? At the end of the day, the decline of traditional masculinity isn't just about fashion. It's about values, expectations, and identity. So what does it mean to be a man today?